Hello, everybody. Hello, guys. I'm really happy to have you here. We're going to talk about going global with a B2B startup. So you all have different experience. You've been leading startups for years, and we're going to share your experience about that. So maybe a first naive question. As you all know, going global could be a game changer for your startup. But it can lead you to success, but it could also lead you to failure. So, as a CEO, I was wondering how do you take this strategic decision? How do you know that it is the good timing? It is a good thing to do for your business. So I don't know. Maybe Julien, you want to start?
Good morning, everyone. So Julien, founder of Cedexis. So maybe if you don't know, maybe you know Waze, the mobile application Waze. So what Waze enable you is to avoid traffic jam. And what Cedexis was doing is about exactly the same, but for internet traffic. So we were collecting billions of data, creating a real-time mapping about the quality of the internet, and thanks to that, knowing where it was struggling and avoid that. And by the way, I'm a huge, big fan of Pipedrive. So thank you for creating that. And I have some story to share with you about why I was forced to use another one by the VC, but that's another story. So the decision is when you want to go, well, I would say, like Ragnar, when you launch a company in the SaaS industry, you want to be global right away. So my co-founder was in Portland, Oregon, so 9 hours time difference away. So global, you have to be global as soon as you are in the SaaS industry. Your customers have customers all around the world, so you need to be global and you need to support them. So the question was more, you start in France, we started in France, we made the solution up and running, and then which country should you choose to start? And that was more because, of course, you can go to the US, and I think we have different vision about how to go to the US, but the point is, should I list the top 100 in terms of audience around the world? I say, okay, here is the top 100. Or should I look for maturity? Southern Europe can be sometimes a little bit less mature than Northern Europe, so that was something you should learn. Going to Germany, we failed totally. And to make it successful, we hired a German guy in Spain with a German number. So that way, going from Barcelona to Berlin or from Munich to Berlin, okay, it's a little longer, but it was way much cheaper. So that was one asset. But then the why, which country to choose, I was using a lot Business France. And that's where I met Matthias and the CCI and say, okay, let's make one first trip just to smell the market, just listen to your heart, listen to your feeling, talk with the local people who are in that country and smell the market. If it's good, then go further. If you don't smell it, like Germany, first trip I did there, just didn't feel it. So I went back and I chose Japan or I chose Israel, for example.
Okay, Florian, maybe you could elaborate a bit on that topic. So you've been active in the US for years. Your platform is made from day one to address a global market. But how do you decide to address this specific market?
Well, from my perspective, if you want to build a startup in enterprise sales, like software, you want to be in the US, so you cannot really succeed without being in the US because it will be half of your business at some point if you're succeeding, and not if you're not. So you build the company to do so, and that's it. So, well, D1, you need to feel that you will need to be in the US. So maybe tactically, the thing is that in the first few years, you want your first customer to be close to your product team because you want a good product, possibly, but immediately you need to be able to get it sold to the US. And that's, I think, the only way to think about building a software company today.
But did you do some tests before heavily investing in the US?
Not really. The way it happened is that we actually managed to get inbound customer from the US that pretty rapidly were able to get into the product. And we did that initially with hiring American people in France. So, well, I guess that you need to build also your team to make sure that you can sell in the US. And I guess that if this first customer were not a success, we would have needed to build the product another way to make sure it could work, I guess.
Maybe Vincent, you're here also as an ex-VP US at Talend, and you may know that Talend did an IPO on Nasdaq two years ago, I guess, if I'm right. So, on your perspective, how do you handle this specific question as a French founder? How do you address this question and this strategic decision?
Yeah, so the IPO was in July 2016, indeed. Yeah. I wasn't a founder at Talend. I was the VP. Well, I was the one responsible for bringing it to the US because I was in the US. So the founders decided to give me the opportunity to launch Talend over there. So I don't know what exactly drove the decision to go to the US, but I was the one that was chosen and had this opportunity. As far as what was said, I agree mostly, because I think if you're in B2B enterprise sales, you cannot ignore that roughly 50–60% of your revenue should eventually come from the US. Now, is the US the first country that I would look at in any situation if I wanted to go broad? Not necessarily. I think it's a decision that needs to be matured, that you need to think about what is there to gain. You need to think about, are you really ready for it? What's specific about typically the US that may be harder than if you were to concentrate on Europe, for instance? Is your product ready for it? Is your competition more established over there than it may be over here? And you know, decide based on that where to go and how to go there. So I think the US for Talend was the first choice, which served me well because it gave me an opportunity to work with them. But I don't think that we should conclude that the US is absolutely number one, go at all cost, because I don't think that's the case.
True, and I think we have the perfect counterexample here with Guillaume. So, Guillaume, you have a specific experience in running a business in Asia, and specifically in China. Can you explain us how you started in this specific region?
Yes, in fact, so Mobpartner, we are an ad network on mobile, and we got the opportunity to get some first client from China. They wanted to go outside China, and so we discovered that we were a big market, and the opportunity to go to China to help them to go in Europe or in US. So it was more a way to, not the first decision when we create the company, but more when we saw with the client, discuss with the client. That's why we decided to go to China and open like that.
And at the end, the company was acquired by a Chinese player. With a pretty big presence in the US, but still a Chinese player.
The company was acquired by Cheetah Mobile in 2015. Cheetah Mobile was the number 3 developer on Android, very strong in China, and their objective was to expand quicker in all other parts of the world using our sales part, which we had in US and Europe.
Okay, great. One of the big topic that we all face when we go abroad is the cultural difference. So I'm pretty sure you have specific stories about that. But maybe my first question would be: what are the countries that are the closest from us, from France or from European culture, and what are the countries that are the most away from us? The more difficult to address.
I'll take a first shot at it. Yeah. I think, when talking about cultural differences, that's definitely one of the items that you need to consider when you go outside, right, global or in a specific country. And there are some obvious ones. cultural differences. I mean, I don't think anybody would be surprised if we say, hey, if you want to go, as a French person, if you want to go do business in Japan, be ready for something different, which is a fact. That said, personally, I've been living in the US for the past 20 years, so I'm an Americano-French. And the US is one of those countries where it's the same as France, right? It's like Westerner countries, they just speak English. And actually, you're bound to having lots of surprises if you limit it at that, because in business, the US is very different. The mentality, the sensibility of people, what they need to hear, what they are used to seeing is much different from what we are used to in France. So,
in what sense?
Well, typically, if we're talking about service, for instance, you know, the French way where you're going to get by and you're going to tap in the back and get away with murder does not work in the US. It's even worse in Japan, by the way. That's one thing. The way in which you sell your product is different. You're not just using English words. You're going to have to align with a value proposition that resonates to the person you're facing, and they are not going to be expecting the same things. It's hard to put your finger on it, but culturally speaking, you don't do business the same way you do in France.
So that has an impact on your organization. So you need to hire people differently. You need to structure your team differently with pre-sales, sales, with a different marketing.
Did you say lie to people differently?
No, you don't lie, but you sell.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it has necessarily an impact on organization per se, but it has an impact on operations. And I think one of the big questions each founder is going to ask himself when deciding to go abroad is, how do you go abroad? Who do you bet on? How do you hire? Do I go myself? Do I hire people? And that's what's very important, being able to choose the right people to play the part.
Mm. Julien?
Well, we can take, just to be very practical, if we look at an example, if we take a sales team, if you look at a sales guy in France, he will do the cold calling, he will set up the meeting, he will go to the meeting. Sometimes the sales is technical enough to do also a big part of the pre-sales, and then he will manage a customer along the way. If you go to the US, the fact is that they are structured in a way to scale very quickly. So everything is, and if you want, for one sales guy that you would hire in France, you might need one person to do the cold calling. And before that, so I forgot, you have the lead gen coming from marketing. So that's one. Then you have the cold calling to ensure that to set up the meeting. Then you have the sales guy going to the meeting, but because he's not going, if it's a technical sale, he will go with a pre-sales guy. And then as soon as it's sold, it goes to a customer success manager who will manage the account. And then you go to customer support, which makes, to compare when you are bootstrapping in France with one person, you might need between 5 to 6 people to do exactly the same job. That's one part when you go to the US. So when I, since the company was half American, half French, we went to the US pretty quickly. And when I did my budget, I said, okay, here is what I was expecting to spend for Europe. Okay, US is expensive. Let's multiply by 2, just to be sure that I have some margin. And if I look now, it's not by 2 that I should have done it, it's by 10. So it cost me about 10 times what I spent to deploy Europe to deploy the US. And if I compare to Asia, just to manage 15% of the group's revenue, I got one VIE. I don't know how to translate that, but one VIE, managing 15% of the group, because in Asia you will work much more in an indirect mode, which scale your capacity to go to meet customers, and because the culture is definitely very different with the Southeast Asia culture, that you need people helping you. To go back to the US, my personal feeling is, if I had to redo Cedexis, I would have gone to Asia before going to the US. Because I don't know, if we start to make it interactive, who is willing to go to the US today? Is owning a startup, and who wants to go to the US? That's not that many. Is it because we are a little bit pessimistic, or we could say that maybe, I don't know on which fake news I read that, but between 70 or 80% of the people who wants to go to the US right now will die because they are about to take that decision. Okay, so think twice about it. Again, if you're able to succeed in California or East Coast, middle of the US is very different. Then if you're able to do it, then it's cool, because then it scales. And it took me about 4 more years than I was expecting to sign my first deal, for my first big deals like Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, or Bloomberg in the US. But when it did, then it scaled. But it's much harder than what we expect. So just be prepared of that as soon as you know, and now you know it. Just be really prepared when you want to go to the US, and maybe, you know, look also to Asia, where business is growing very, very quickly. We always talk about Silicon Valley, where we expect that, you know, have a wow effect in Silicon Valley. But when you go to Israel, or when you go to China, or even Taipei, you got some really cool companies growing like crazy with a big potential, and they love French technology and they love European technology. So let's go to the low-hanging fruit quicker.
Florian, maybe 2 words on that. Do you agree with this difference in organization? Do you see a big difference from what we do in France?
Actually, no. Well, not that much. I think that, in fact, at scale, you need to specialize people within your sales organization with pre-sales, customer success, blah, 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 blah. And it's just that if you set up in the US, you have the impression that you need to do so immediately, just because you can't get really people with a founder mentality that can do everything. Why? It's because you cannot really hire smart people in the US when you get there first, because smart people won't work for a French company because you look stupid. So you actually get people that already used to work in companies at scale, and that you pay much more than what you should do initially in the first years maybe. And that's why you kind of feel that you need to get more organized than you should, given the size of your business in the US. So there is like some bias in your perception of the organization. Just that's the way it is. But at the end of the day, I feel like even in France, when you scale, you start having an organization that is pretty similar to the US, even in terms of ratio, number of people you use for lead gen, pre-sales, and so on. In my current organization, and very similar in the US compared to France or Europe. Just that possibly the sales quota and so on are not the same, just because the money has not the same value in both sides of the Atlantic. But that's about it.
And Guillaume, what are the Asia and China? It is really different to do business there?
In our experience, there is 2 elements that help us to success. One, I think it's the same as US. You need to create a brand of your company to attract the good people. Because if you arrive in China, say I'm French, you don't speak Chinese, and they don't speak necessarily English all, it will be complicated. So you need really to find the right person to open the door. So one thing, your first client. Our first client was our first sales. He brings us the next 10 clients, and thanks to that we success the first start. So this is 2 elements that change a lot, and that Julien was explaining. The indirect sales was very important, and you don't need a so big structure. The other point also that helped us to have a good back office in France. So we hire Chinese also in France to make the link, because it was very important. Not only a question of not a time frame, but really a question of a language that has more impact with China and Asia, but especially in China, than in US or everybody speaks English.
And as a CEO or a co-founder, you move to the local destination. So Julien, you did the move, but Florian, you didn't. Maybe you can share with us the two
empirically,
different
you
ways.
can operate in the US and grow your business in the US the size of a business in Europe, while tripling every year without moving the founder to the US. So empirically, you don't need to move yourself to the US in order to raise money in the US and grow a company in the US. But you need to travel a lot. Airplane becomes your best friend. and you carry a little luggage with you. Invest in a good piece of luggage. That's important for your safety, etc., etc., and your back.
For sure. My co-founder was in the US, but even though he was in charge of the technical part, I was more in the business part. And again, if I had to redo the job, I would have moved to the US myself. And I totally agree. I made 370,000 miles in the last 12 months. So, you are in trouble when the security guy at the airport knows you already.
Okay, and definitely it's a costly move. So you need funding to execute that plan. Do you believe that you need a local VC to enter a specific country? Could be China or the US, or can we do it on our own?
Actually, I agree with Florian on do you need to move the co-founder to the US? I personally don't think you need to have a co-founder if you have operations in the US. But as was explained, if you have operations in the US, it's probably going to cost you a lot of money. So you're likely to want to have funding from the US because you can have a lot of money. And to raise money in the US, you do need a co-founder to go to the US. So whether you need a co-founder, I think is more a question, as far as the US, of whether you expect to raise money in the US, more so than having a direct relationship with the operations per se, scaling the sales. And if I was to take Talent as an example, the CEO moved to the US a year after I launched the US. I was in Southern California. He moved to Northern California, to Silicon Valley, and he didn't raise money in the US at first, but his move to the US allowed him to raise money in the US. So I think that's important.
And in terms of perception, having a US VC, does it change anything for hiring good people?
I think it changed for the US customers. They feel more comfortable if you have a US VC in your round. But on the day-to-day, why did I choose to have two US VCs? So creation 2010, raised 1 million through French business angels. Then 2011, I raised 7 million through two US VC. And why did I do that? Is because the value of the company, even if I had only French customers at that time, it has changed now and the market is much more mature. But in 2011, the value of the company in France was about half the value I had in the US without any customers there. So, on one side you give the key, on the other side you give the porte-clés. Je sais pas comment on traduit ça. So, so I prefer to make that choice. If I look at the help I had from the business angels or for my second round through Nokia and Foxconn, and now that I'm pretty close with the French VCs, European VCs, the market is smaller here, so the local VCs are much, much more helpful than the US. I had to do the interim because I had 6 VP sales in the US, just to give you how hard it was to launch the US. And I made 6 months there and said, okay, when you wanted to invest, you told me that you had a big Rolodex. Please, it's time to help me. I didn't get any contact, nothing, niche, nix, nada. I don't know how to say it in Estonian, but so okay. I think the VC in Europe and in France, you are not only a line in an Excel file. They help you. They bring you advice. And it's very easy to understand. The market is smaller there, so their reputation is also quickly impacted if you're unhappy with your local VC, where if your VC is 9 hours away from you, they don't care that much. So sorry to shoe shine your shoes a little bit for Alven, but another VC, but that's what I really think about why you need to use VC and choose your board member close to you. That's a mistake I did.
Yeah, definitely there is I think it's hard to measure, you never know, but I think there is an impact in terms of company profile and abilities to recruit people, key people, because of the VCs. meaning like executives in the US would look at your website, would look at the list of investors, and if they don't recognize the name of the investors, it would be like maybe not a red card, but a yellow card in terms of the appreciation of the company. So if they've got a second yellow card, I guess you're out. And so here, this nice executive recruitment won't happen because you don't look good. And second things, I think it's like, perhaps it's important for key customers. I feel that if you need to grow in the US and like try to get to $1 million a year, kind of 1 million CVs, it's very hard to get those US customers sign off these kind of contracts if you are not backed by VCs they are aware of, I think. But I haven't done the A/B test, so I don't know for sure.
What about the mistake that you did in the US or in Asia? What are the obvious ones that we should all avoid if we start a business abroad?
We didn't make any.
Okay.
No, actually,
maybe not this time, but 20 years ago when you started.
No, we did. I believe the biggest mistake is contrary to what was suggested earlier, we didn't leverage any existing organization or association to help discover the US. So we really, at the beginning, when they hired me, we bootstrapped everything. I mean, all the way to creating the Inc. I had to find a lawyer and then trying to understand the ecosystem over there. And we didn't leverage any help. And I think we lost probably a good 6 to 10 months because of that. We could have gone much faster, I believe.
Well, maybe at that time, Business France and CC were not as
true too,
as efficient as now. But on my side, I totally agree with what you said. I would add recruitment, hiring, methodology to hire people. We made it the French way. Okay, I smell the guy. Okay, look, the resume looks cool. And for the US, they know how to sell themselves since kindergarten. So they are very well experienced to be show off. And when you look at the guy, you say, wow, he should marry my daughter. Well, she is only 15 years old, so forget about it. But you know, you got the guy. And after 1 week, say, and 3 weeks after, say, oh shit, that's not the right guy, and you lose time. And when I was talking about taking the interim during 6 months, I had to hire salespeople because, of course, I met the local ones, and some of them were in the company for more than 6 months and didn't know even the name of the product. So, and I hired 7 recruiting companies, so just to get a funnel. Then I met 34 salespeople, and the guy I hired for salespeople was a previous CTO. He was working for the government, so no Rolodex, and I liked his energy, and he was an organizer of the gay parade in San Francisco, which means that he know many people, and I just like the guy. And who's the guy who? And so I showed the resume to the VC and say, okay, another French guy trying to do something weird. So I say, no, that's not good. I say, okay, I'm in charge of it. Let's try it. In any case, in 15 days, the guy's out, so why not try? Who signed Twitter, Facebook, Slack, Pinterest, Microsoft, Bloomberg, Airbnb? It's the guy. And he was just amazing. So there are some pépites. But again, my father lives in Ethiopia. Imagine that an Ethiopian guy comes to, and I love Ethiopia, so no, but the guy comes to France and say, okay, I got the best idea, and I want to conquest the global world. Well, even as a French guy, say, he's coming from a market where there is nothing about IT. The internet access in Ethiopia is very low. That's how US people sees you. So finding the right people is a big part of luck, and that's why you need to use your network and use the French mafia or the French connections to meet others, and that's where entrepreneurs help each other, and they will provide you, because I totally agree with what you said, the good guys, they go to Facebook, they go to Google, and finding the right pépite is very tough.
I will say the same, but yes, first mistake was not in China, but in US, the first recruitment. We were traveling, contact with LinkedIn, discuss on call, speak very well, like all American, a very good seller and over. Then we move in US for an event, we meet them and we see that, okay, that was not the same picture, let's say. So yes, move, meet people before hiring for sure. And yeah, mistake happen often the first time.
Maybe one last word, Florian?
Yeah, like a very practical advice is indeed to, I think, hire an internal recruiter in the US and possibly internal finance people in the US as soon as possible. I think that's a mistake I made, meaning you can do your things by leveraging Business France or other systems in order to get your company running in the US, but like the way a US company should really operate in terms of benefits, key companies to work with and so on, that's only local people and like people in the startup world in the US that know how to do it. And also, until you've got an internal recruiter, you would get through firms or whatever to do to recruit. And yeah, basically you won't be able to actually build a true recruitment pipeline, and you will basically also get played by candidates that, because they know how to sell themselves and basically speak English better than you, will look smarter to you than they are.
Thank you very much, guys, for sharing your experience with us. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.